were doing a study on metabolic adaptation, correct?
Yeah.
And what were the main findings that you looked into that when you were looking at people who really got pretty much contest lean? What were those findings?
So, yeah, what we did with, it's kind of funny. So, like you said, I competed in 2013, which was right when I started grad school.
Mm-hmm.
And I showed up to grad school, like, literally a week after my last show. And everyone's like, dude, you look and seem like you are a dead person. I mean, it was brutal.
Yeah.
They didn't recognize me when I showed up because I interviewed 40 pounds heavier. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So, the first few months of grad school were brutal. Just getting used to the new workload, new state, completely new. You know, I moved several states away from home, totally on my own. And the post-competition process, with all those stressors plus everything that prep puts you through, it was wild. And I'd never really thought about kind of the aftermath of getting that lean. So we did two things. First, we wrote a review paper about metabolic adaptation in general. So I wrote that with Lane and Abby Smith-Ryan, who's my PhD advisor. And what we were trying to do is just lay out from a physiological perspective what exactly happens when pretty lean people get really lean.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did in writing that was, you know, we kind of laid it out, put out the evidence that was available, which admittedly there's not in 2014, there wasn't a lot of bodybuilder research to really pick from. So it was borrowing from animal research, obesity research, and a few studies in athletes. So it became clear to us, you know, someone needs to do a little bit more actual research in this population. But we also realized as we wrote it, we're like, man, all these things put you in a really bad spot after competition. And one thing, there was a few studies out there on preparation for bodybuilding, but almost all of them, it was like the day of the show, all right, we're done here, and everybody goes away. Mm-hmm. But the really interesting stuff happens after the show. When it's trying to get from getting a little leaner every single day to getting back to a normal body weight that you can actually maintain.
Sure.
So what we want to do with the study was take a look at them right around the time of the show, but also take a look at them in that immediate post-competition period just to see what the recovery process was starting to look like. And it was logistically very difficult because if you're trying to look at competition recovery, you've got to make sure every single participant is going to be geographically close to each other so you can measure them. But also it has to be their last competition of the year. Right. Because if they're about to go do another competition in 4 weeks, then we're not actually looking at a post-competition period. We're looking at them just kind of maintaining.
Yeah, I would imagine finding a sample size for that would be pretty difficult.
It was brutal. And, you know, so the sample size was pretty small, and that's why. It was tough. Yeah. I mean, it took a year longer than I thought, and I actually ended up having to fly down to Florida to go collect data. Because that was where the data was. You know, usually you try to attract it to you. In this case, it's not even an option. I learned that Chapel Hill is not a bodybuilding hub.
Right.
But it was cool because what we could do is document where they were at the time of competition, but also where they were, you know, a month or two later. And the whole idea was to kind of make a starting point at which other researchers can build off that and take a closer look at some of these time points. The real practical stuff, when we found them at the time of competition, they exhibited signs that were consistent with a slightly repressed metabolic rate, which we would expect. That's kind of the metabolic adaptation aspect of it. Their resting metabolic rate was a bit lower than we would have expected based on their lean tissue.
Roughly how much?
Off the top of my head, I'm not certain. And one of the things that you have to keep in mind is in the paper, we plotted individual points because we wanted to really show that, you know, when you have, you know, a small sample, I think it was somewhere around 15 people, giving a mean on that is informative, but we wanted to show the spread of where people were at.
Right.
And what's important with that, whenever you read bodybuilding research, trying to figure out, based on the means and the standard deviations, how many of these people were lean enough to really be dealing with this in a major way. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So there was quite a bit of spread. No one was more than I don't think there were many people more than 15-ish% lower than we would expect, 15 or 20-ish, which is pretty consistent with other research. I'd have to double check the paper. It was a couple
Just
years
to add
ago.
my own anecdote, I had recently done that myself, and I didn't get a pre-measurement, but when they had taken my BMR, with the tubes and everything hooked up, their estimate for me was about 1900, and after a probably 6-month long diet, I was around 1440 is what they had me. So I mean, it was quite a significant difference from their estimate for me.
Yeah. And so the thing to keep in mind is, as you're going down, then obviously your estimated number's also going to go down as weight reduces. To some extent, it's going to depend on what equation you're using, what parameters go into that equation. But, to approximate it, you would expect it to be 10, 15-ish% below normal, or below what you would predict. And again, different equations are going to shift that number a little bit differently. But what our data showed was there was evidence that metabolic rate was a little below what we would expect. And that certainly varied a lot between individuals. Some people were well below, some people were just a little bit below. The hormones that we looked at were also consistent with what we would expect with contest prep. So leptin was low, testosterone in males was a bit low. Cortisol was high, I think, off the top of my head, but even with the case studies we've done, cortisol is usually high near competition.
Right.
Even if there's no dieting involved, it's just really stressful.
Right. Is that salivary or blood levels?
In the BioLane study, we did saliva.
Okay.
At least one of the case studies we've done, it was blood. Trying to keep time of day consistent because there's that diurnal rhythm. But yeah, so the hormone profile was indicative of a person who was really stressed, really hungry, and really tired. And the metabolic rate reflected that. And what we were interested in was watching those change over that immediate recovery period. And what we saw was, and just combining it with a couple case studies we've done since, in that immediate period, one of the things to really look out for is you're going to have a lot of fluctuation in total body water. And so, I think we saw it was somewhere in the ballpark. I forget the exact value, but we saw that based on the ultrasound body comp we did for that study, it looked like there was quite a big initial increase in lean tissue, but there wasn't. What happens is you get more hydrated, more carbs in your diet, more sodium in your diet, and literally in the first couple of days, you're going to see your body weight change. I mean, often by at least a kilogram, even if you're trying to keep it pretty consistent.
Yeah.
And that's almost exclusively water weight.
Right.
And so the thing to keep in mind is some people after a competition are planning for this huge rebound in lean mass.
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
oh man, my body's dying to rebound with some muscle tissue.
Right.
And the thing that can be tricky with that is a lot of ways you would measure body comp would actually confirm their suspicion.
Right.
But it would be inaccurate. So, as a competitor and someone who plans to be coaching a lot of people in the future, I think best practice is to budget in a kilogram or two of just immediate water weight and then reassess from there. What was really kind of a bummer was in the post-competition period we saw, aside from the initial increase in water weight, there was really not a lot of lean tissue being rebounded. Yeah. It was mostly fat mass, which makes sense, but is still a bit disheartening.
Yeah, it tends to be a little delayed, right? Compared to the fat mass gain.
Yeah, there seems to be, and that was actually a researcher named DeLu has talked about this in the past quite a bit, but there seems to be a preferential regain of fat mass in the immediate post-competition period, which I think is probably one of the more applicable findings from the study we did with the BioLane grant. And yeah, so the main takeaways from that were budget for an initial pretty abrupt increase in water weight, and that's intuitive, but hadn't really been documented in the research yet. But also, it's quite unlikely that in that first month or two that you're talking about substantial increases in real lean tissue, aside from just rehydration and glycogen replenishment. So I think that helps shift the focus of how your diet should be oriented in the post-competition period. Now, another caveat I want to put on that is certainly in the first month or two, we wouldn't expect full recovery.
Mm-hmm.
We did see things starting to trend in a positive direction, even in that short of a time frame. But a month or two is not even close.
Right.
Some of the case studies we've done and case studies that other people have done, 4 months, maybe 6 months, you're starting to get in the ballpark where you start to see hormones are near baseline, metabolic rate is near baseline. And so I think it's really important when someone's competing to help them kind of shift their focus